Stephendiego, and you're tuned in to Breaking Down the Breakdown. On today's episode, we are going to talk about dealing with loss and everything else that comes with it. Hello guys. Round 2. Alright, It's funny that I'm starting my podcast like this. I had to delete that earlier. Hi guys. Good evening, good morning. I don't know where you guys are, but it's so weird having to restart my greetings, but this is what happens when you look like you just got out of bed and it is 11:30 at night here. Welcome to an episode of Breaking Down the Breakdown. To all my podcast listeners, I'm going to say thank you again. I'm not going to say why. I mean, y'all already know, but I just want to say thank you for actually sticking with me. Thank you. Yeah, so I actually had a malfunction with the volume earlier, so I had to restart it on Facebook Live, and I am doing a kind of crossover tonight. I mean, I miss doing this live stuff. The only difference is that I am alone tonight. I am my own guest. But let me get right to it before, it's already been a minute and I'm just babbling away. Today's episode is super tough. Just a trigger warning for people who might not have processed the loss of a loved one just yet. You might not want to stick around and listen. You can always skip it. Always remember, my episodes, you do not have to watch them or listen to them in chronological order. Whatever suits you. It is what it is, right? Now, let's get right down to it, folks. I decided to talk about loss tonight because this is something that I've actually wanted to explore and express for a while now. But I know I couldn't do it until I've actually processed it with my therapist. Because, I was the way I do my episodes, I don't know if you guys notice, I always bring on people and whatever issues they're dealing with, we kind of talk about it on the spot. With this one, it was very difficult because I knew that in some ways, the death of a few of my loved ones kind of had a hand in the things that's happened to me lately, right? And I feel strong enough to finally share that, and that's what we're going to do today. Remember, if you guys are listening live, watching me live on Facebook, if you have anything to add or comment or ask, feel free. I guess it's this side on the comment section over there. Totally join in on the fun. Now, this is very tough, but I will start with, I know that death hits a lot of people different. I've always been the kind of kid, and I say kid because, a lot of us experience death when we're very young. It may not be a super close relative, but a relative of sorts. Or even a neighbor, or something happened to somebody that we were friends with, but you get my point. I always was very uncomfortable when I would be at funerals. And not uncomfortable because I don't want to be there. I mean, when you're a kid, you kind of have no choice sometimes. Your parents, I don't know how it is in Canada, but back home, you kind of have to go with your parents. You kind of have to go because, you got to show your respect, right? And it's the right thing to do. I feel like, if you're the kind of parent that doesn't want to expose your children to that at such a young age, respect that, right? But for a lot of people, they kind of, I guess in Filipino culture, that kind of overrides it because they want you to kind of show compassion and love to those who lost their loved ones. But in every instance that I've had to go to a funeral, I've always been the type to laugh. Not at the situation, not at the dead bodies, but for some reason, I always just found the most inappropriate things and I would just make myself laugh or make my friends laugh or somebody around me. I would just try to make them laugh. And, kind of breaking it down now, I'm starting to realize it's because of the atmosphere, right? Like everyone is so sad. And as a kid, I don't know, again, I don't know what it's like for you guys growing up, but for me, I always used to get made fun of because I cried easily. And I just wanted to avoid crying. So I would always just laugh, or I would literally look at the floor, think of other things, force myself to think of just anything but whatever is happening in front of me. Very unhealthy, I'm starting to realize that, and it might be one of the reasons as to why I've developed what I have. I gotta talk to my therapist about that because I completely forgot about that fact. But I swear to God, this has a point, guys. My point is, when I finally had to deal with death of somebody that was really close to me, somebody that I loved, I didn't know how to deal with it. Because I've always tried to just avoid the feelings, to avoid the emotions. I've always, kind of like not fooled myself, but I've always told myself like, oh, like everybody dies, like yada, yada, yada. And it's because no one that close to me has passed. And I remember when a really good friend of mine, obviously I'm not going to name names, passed away. And we didn't really talk much before he passed because things happened. It was complicated, but we started kind of rebuilding the friendship that we had. We started repairing the friendship that and I know it was my fault that I kind of fucked up. And so when he passed, it was so hard to deal with. It was so difficult. I remember a friend of mine called me actually messaged me to tell me what happened. And I couldn't believe it. And I called my ex that morning. We were still together. My poor ex called him at like God knows how early, just to cry, just to be like, I can't believe this. I got the comfort that I needed from the people that I needed it from. But a part of me, even after that grief, like I went to work, and instead of just listening to myself and kind of being like, I can't do this because, like I lost somebody super important to me today. My head kept saying, well, it's just a friend. It's not family. So, you still have to go to work. And I remember I went to work and I was totally out of it. I was, the smallest things, I would cry. I would just bawl my eyes out. And I was trying not to do that. And I eventually told my coworkers, this person died. And I remember our old manager asking me, what was this person to you? And I said, oh, it was like one of my best friends. And she was just kind of like, I'm so sorry to hear that. And then nothing, like, didn't even try to offer me like, hey, maybe you want to take it easy and do this. Maybe do you want to go home? No, because it was just a friend, and I feel like that's why it was asked, why, oh, well, who was this person to you? And so it's just kind of like, okay, well, I guess I really got to deal with this. And, I feel like that kind of made it seem not as important as it should have been. Fast forward to my friend's funeral, I don't even think I shed a tear. And it's because I've had this notion of, well, I've already cried enough about the situation, so I'm not going to cry again. I mean, I did cry a little bit, but I wanted to bawl my eyes out. But at the same time, I didn't want to look weird because there were people there. And it was one of those things where it's like, well, why do I care? Now that I look back, why do I care what people think I do at the funeral? Why do I care how I look at a funeral? It's a fucking funeral. Anyway, so enough about that funeral talk. Fast forward to when my grandpa died. I remember my cousin told me, actually my niece told me, and again, the same deal. I fell apart, called my ex. My ex is actually great with these things. And I tried to explain to my ex how important my grandpa was to me because, no shade to my dad. I love my dad, but my dad didn't raise me. My grandpa did. So that was my father passing. And so it was a hard pill to swallow because immediately, right when I got the news, what came to my head was the fact that I, for the past few years, have not been home to see him. Like the last time I came home, I was 16 in the Philippines. And at this time, I was already 27, I believe. 11 years of me saying, I promise I'm coming home soon. I promise this, I promise that. So it was hard. And the funny part is that I even tried to question if maybe I shouldn't go home. And this is because I didn't know I had OCD, but I've always been afraid of flying. And I was convinced that if I set foot on a plane, that plane was going to crash and I'd die. And I would, argue with myself like, oh, but dad would understand if I can't go home because I'm scared. I'll just pray for him here. And, thank God my mom was just kind of like super supportive about it because she knew I was scared of flying. But she told me, she was just like, like, are you sure you don't want to see him one last time? And I was like, hey, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to go home. And it was a really, it was the right decision for me. Not just because I conquered my fear, but at the same time, because it did help me kind of alleviate some of the guilt that I had felt already. Can you just imagine if I actually didn't go home, he was buried, and I never got to see him again. Not one last time, not even to send him off. Now, I know I kind of jumped from my friend to my grandpa, but I just kind of wanted to paint a picture of what this episode means to me and what I'm dealing with. All the repressed emotions that I've had towards grief and death kind of manifests itself into a huge, catastrophic issue for me, because it was one of the key components that I had to kind of find in order for me to help myself with my journey with living with OCD, and a lot of these things sometimes we don't realize. Like, you can poke and prod your memories, but if there's things that are repressed, or there's things that you've tried to erase from your memory, that's gonna be so fucking hard. I dug everything up because I really wanted to just be able to live with what I have, rather than I want to get rid of this, but I want to learn how to live with this. So I took that journey and found this out, because there would be moments in my intrusive thoughts or my OCD thoughts where I would feel immense guilt and shame and regret, and it's like a movie in my head of all of the memories that I had with my friend and my grandpa, and all of the what ifs and what could have been, and maybe I shouldn't have done this, maybe I should have done that. And that sends me into this other zone where I start to feel like I'm trapped in this feeling of despair because of what I didn't do. I'm gonna share some stuff with you guys. It's gonna be really difficult. Not that it's been easy, but in terms of dealing with my friend, I remember my friend asking me where he should go for school. Okay, this is Exhibit A. My friend asked me where he should go for school, and he was debating on a few universities down in the U.S. And I told him to go to the specific one, and he's just like, yeah, maybe I should go there. I'm like, yeah, because you'll be closer here at least, like, and whatever. Like, my point was, I was part of the decision making for his choice. It's funny because literally right after he passed, all I could think of, and even until maybe a few months ago, before I talked to my therapist about it, all I could think of was, this was my fault. Logically, it made zero sense. That wasn't my fault. I wasn't there at the accident. I wasn't, I didn't do anything. But my head kept saying, you were the one who told him to go to that specific school. You were the one who gave him a reason to stay in that specific school. And for me, it's like, like, it was easy to just kind of get into that feeling of anxiety. And it's like, oh my God, it's so right. If I just had done this, if I just had done that, maybe he'd still be alive. And it's like, I beat myself up over that for years. I lost a friend because I couldn't face him. Because I felt so guilty that this had happened to our friend. I stopped talking to my friend because every time we would be around, me and this other friend made a pact to kind of have each other's backs. In terms of, kind of reliving our friends' memories. And I couldn't do it. Because all I kept thinking of in my head was, this was my fucking fault. And I know that a lot of us, a lot of you guys, might have had similar, thought processes with people you've lost. Because that's how it works sometimes. To not be able to give someone a proper send-off, not prepared, you start to kind of dig and dig and dig and dig into things that are like, oh my God, I remember this one time I didn't apologize for that. Oh my God, there was this one time and I should have done this, I should have done that. And then you keep thinking, and then it just kind of snowballs from there. You start to say to yourself, holy shit, like, are they ever going to be able to forgive me? And because we are so accustomed to, hearing the words, okay, like, yeah, everything's cool after saying sorry. And that's kind of like our, oh, perfect, they forgive me. Because we can't hear that from the dead. You get stuck in a loop. And in this loop, you start finding out more and more things that are not even relevant to how you're supposed to be feeling. And you're making a mountain out of each of these molehills. And I kid you not, that piles on, and it develops into something worse that starts to affect your everyday life. And because that's what happened to me. Like, I had that with my friend. And sure enough, a few years after that, that's when my grandpa died. Oh my God. When I was coming back home from the Philippines after the funeral, I had an anxiety attack, and I didn't know it was an anxiety attack. I thought I was being possessed. I started hearing things. I wasn't really hearing things. I was imagining things, right? And I tried to find the correlation for the longest time. I asked myself, what did I do differently? Why am I all of a sudden this bad? Why do I all of a sudden feel like there's demons after me? And in my head, it was like, oh, it's because you went to the Philippines. You probably went somewhere haunted. Not realizing that it's because I went back home and I saw my grandpa. I I sent him off. And I didn't even cry at the funeral. I didn't even shed a tear. Because all I could feel at that moment was anger towards myself. All I kept thinking of in that moment was, I wonder how each and every single one of my family members standing here right now feel about me. I wonder if in their heads they're looking at me saying, you were you were his favorite child. It's an inside joke. You were his favorite child and you didn't even come home. You came home once. It now doesn't even just relate. I mean, it relates to him, but now it's not even just directly between how I feel about him and how he might feel about me, Like now it's everybody else. And it's because I never properly processed my emotions. Well, and like I had undiagnosed OCD, which made everything worse, right? It's very challenging to kind of relive it again. But sometimes we kind of have to do that so that we can get past it. So this is why I'm talking about it. But my point is, I know a lot of us, if we're not feeling it right now, from a loss of somebody we loved years ago, right? Now, it doesn't have to be like what happened like last week or maybe a month ago. This could be something that happened years ago. I know sometimes we sleep or we try to sleep at night. That thought crosses our minds and we beat ourselves up over it. And it's like, why? Do we feel like if we keep on beating ourselves up over it, they can see us from heaven or, the afterlife and see us and say, whoa, you look like you're having a pretty rough time over things that you regret with me. Okay, I forgive you. But it's a cycle. Almost every night. Doesn't even have to be at night. You could just be sitting down in the afternoon. You start to think about that person, how much you miss them, and then that starts going on in your head. I say it's dangerous because it's another thing that takes us away from the present. Now, when we talk about anxieties, we talk about it's because we're living in the future. And every time we have an anxiety attack, we always ground ourselves, right? We practice mindfulness. We meditate to remind ourselves that, these are our surroundings. Like everything is okay. Like I'm catastrophizing situations. I am not psychic. I cannot predict the future. And there's that. But oftentimes, we don't realize that these same practices, like the same methods that we have can really help us get out of that zone that pulls us back to our past. Like if anxiety lives in the future, guilt Regret and shame lives in the past. So why do we keep going back? We don't need to. Much like with having anxieties, we don't need to. And this is why I wanted to talk about it today. Because I used to cry every other night. And this was after my breakup with my ex. And that kind of triggered a lot of things. Because it's another form of loss. I mean, not death, thank goodness. But it started to feel like everyone that I loved was leaving. And you've heard that line before from movies or from, random people that, they just feel like, oh my God, like I don't want to be here anymore because everybody I love just tends to leave me. And it's like, hello, there's how many other people that love you? But you can't seem to see that because you're focusing on the ones that you feel like you've done wrong. Or the ones who left. Right? So again, we gotta pull ourselves back. But it's hard. I'm saying it like it's easy to just meditate and be like, I'm back in the fucking zone. Hell no. That's not it. Right? That's not what I'm trying to accomplish with this talk. What I'm trying to say here is that we've held ourselves accountable enough for things that we might not have been able to do. Or things that we can never, ever change. And if we keep beating ourselves up over it, is this the kind of life that we want to live? Do we want to continue spending time with those who love us right now, but not being present because we keep on either, living in fear of the future or living in the sins of our past? Difficult, I know. But at the same time, we all have to face it at some point and realize that, damn, I actually deserve to be happy. And sometimes the things that are holding us back from our own happiness is our past. People say don't think about the past because it don't help your future. I don't agree with that. We do have to look towards our past for clues as to how to live our present, better. You just can't live there. And I know it's easier said than done. I know that. So don't worry. I'm not expecting you guys to get to practice this and get it right away, right? But I do want to remind you guys, if you have dealt with loss before, or if you're dealing with one right now, if you feel like you're actually okay, like you feel like you've already processed it, just kind of check again. I'm not saying this like you really haven't, right? I don't know you guys. I don't know my listeners that well. But I just want to make sure. Are you guys okay? Have you actually made peace? Not with them, but with yourselves over them. Because that might be one of the reasons as to why you can't seem to retain your happiness for a long time. I knew that was mine. Because it's just how the brain works sometimes. We're happy and then we look at the time and say, fuck, I'm so happy right now. I know something's gonna happen later. I know I'm gonna think about this later. But that's one less thing to be worried about when you actually start to face it. I'm sorry I had to talk about this, but this is something that haunted me for years. And I didn't even know it was haunting me. It was the very first time I actually cried during therapy session talking about this. You know, my therapist knows I don't cry. Like, I don't cry during our sessions, no matter how difficult it was, because I didn't realize how scared I was. I didn't realize how guilty I felt over everything. And it was partially, the reason as to why I didn't really have much self-confidence. Funny enough, I know you're like, wait, what? Your grief makes you feel that way? Your guilt makes you feel that way? Yeah. Because you know what happens in my head? Let's say I get a nice haircut and I take a fucking selfie or whatever and I post it on social media. Let's say I win something. Let's say I do this, I do that. Post it on social media. My head always goes, yeah, wouldn't that have been nice if you got to, let's say, the win? When I won this thing called Battle of the Bands with my band before. I was so happy. But in my head, it was like, wouldn't it be better if you were able to share this with your grandpa? Yeah. Okay, but you can't because he's gone. Okay, but that's not my fault why he's gone. True, it's not your fault why he's gone. But because you didn't visit him, you don't deserve this kind of happiness. Now start punishing yourself. It's so troll. But sometimes that's just how it works. And now I'm starting to realize that doesn't have to be how it works. It really doesn't. I know not everybody is where I'm at right now. And I know some people are, way ahead of me when it comes to these things. And I know some people are still struggling. And I just wanted to kind of open this up to you guys and make you guys understand that, hey, you deserve some compassion too. And self-compassion is where it's at, especially when it comes to dealing with these things. Because it's not easy. Because these are the kinds of things that no matter how many people show you comfort, no matter how many people show you love, and we do this every day, especially during COVID times, when we see people, they post up the photos and we're all already like, fuck, somebody died again. And we send our condolences and we send our love to them, and it's, that they appreciate it. But you and I also both know it won't really do much. It's nice, but let's call it for what it is, right? We genuinely are sending them our love and condolences. But it is up to them to feel that love, and it is up to them to really get themselves out of that, right? And there's no timeline or time limit for mourning. But it's important to not also beat yourself up while you're mourning. It's important to also stop blaming yourself while you're mourning. And it is so hard. I get it. So I guess the point of today's episode is to show you guys a few things. Number one, we all deal with loss differently. We all know that. But number two, it doesn't matter how differently we deal with it. In some ways, we need to be able to convey to the person who's dealing with a loss, to allow them to understand that, I don't know how you feel right now, but none of this is their fault. Whatever happened in the past is in the past. And you need to start showing yourself some love when all of this is over. Without actually having to say those words. Because try to say that to somebody who's dealing with loss, and trust me, you'll get blocked. You'll get removed from their lives. They're at their most vulnerable time. But as friends, this is what we need to do, right? We gotta be there for them. But not real. How do I explain this? It's like being there for that person. I don't want to say not coddling them, because it's nice to coddle them, especially at that moment. But we need to remind ourselves of our intention. That, hey, we are here to remind them that not only that the person that passed away was loved, but that they are loved too. And that even though we can't be here for them 24/7, they can be there for themselves 24/7. As hard as it is, it's possible. It's kind of a mixture of a tough love, ain't it? But not really. Because whenever we are around them, we get to show them the love that they need to feel. And it's just about when we're not around anymore. Because it gets so lonely when you're with your thoughts. Especially when you're dealing with loss. When you start to play back memories, great memories of you and the person that had passed. And you start to remember the good times, and you remember that that's not going to happen anymore. Then you descend into sadness about it not happening anymore. Then you descend further into, oh my God, I wasted so much time not being around them when I could have been. Then you start descending into thinking about the time you wasted while you were with them, but didn't make them happy. And then now all of a sudden you see yourself as the bad guy. And you start to question, were you ever really a good friend, a good son, a good father, good mother, good daughter, good everything, good person. Then you get to lose your grip on reality for a bit, because you're so stuck in this vicious cycle in your head of what ifs. And then you're back to mourning all over again, and grieving all over again, and not being able to move on. And I know this doesn't happen to a lot of people, and I'm glad and I'm grateful that some of you guys are strong enough to really understand and to really be able to deal with death. But there are people like me. There are people like me who has a hard time getting over things. I mean, I can't get over certain things because I have OCD, yes, but that's exactly what I mean. And mental health illness aside, you don't have to have OCD to deal with these things, right? You don't have to be, dealing with anxieties to have a hard time getting over things. No, that's not always about that. It's just human nature. It's emotions. Are you an emotional person? This was hard because I wanted to cry at some points, but I didn't. But guys, just remember, especially during COVID times, we're not just dealing with COVID. We're dealing with so many other things that a lockdown can do to a person. We need to start being more mindful and compassionate, especially those who have lost somebody during these times. because it is the worst time to be locked up with your thoughts. Thank you, Emily. Thank you for that. She said, thank you for sharing this. I am so sorry if this was so grim. I know most of the time my podcast very educational or like, whatever. But today I just had to kind of get to the dark parts of this because these are things we choose not to talk about. Well, yeah, because it's so dark, right? Like sometimes when we call up our friends, we just want to talk about good stuff, right? Talk about how shitty it is right now that we're locked down. But somebody has to say this because it can't just be me that goes on their Facebook page or even Instagram sometimes and sees people's display picture being changed to all black, or that candle thing. Or you're scrolling down your timeline and you're seeing people saying, I'm so sorry for your loss. It's insane. So I felt like, this might be the right time to talk about this. Because we don't know when we're going to deal with loss. And when we do, we need to be prepared. Not prepared so that we're emotionally strong about it. I'm talking about prepared so that when it does happen, we don't descend into madness. We don't descend into delusions thinking that these things somehow were our fault. That these things somehow were avoidable if we had just done something, and we end up blaming ourselves and living the next few years riddled with guilt and changing the way we are completely to numb ourselves just in case we gotta deal with loss again. Anyway, thank you for listening, guys. This has been Breaking Down the Breakdown. I'm so sorry this was so dark. But thank you so much, and I will see you guys next week. I'm still trying to get one of my friends on here to talk about fitness and how it affected his mental health. But it's exam season. It's kind of hard, but I'll keep y'all posted. Thank you again. If you have any questions or if you want to get on the show and share your stories with us. Now, you don't have to be dealing with the things most of the people are dealing with to be on the show. If you really just want to vent, honestly, I'll have you on the show and we'll make something just for you. Because don't forget, I created this show so that people eventually can have an outlet for things that they've wanted to say but just had no one to say it to. Because sometimes talking to your wall can drive you nuts. Thank you for listening, guys. I'll see you again next week.